Sanbonani, Dumelang, good morning. Welcome everybody. Thanks for joining us today. My name is Prof. Thomas Pooley. I'm the Chair of Art and Music. I'd like to welcome our members of management. I see Prof. Madisa is here, Extended Management, Prof. Sekalo, UNISA Press, thanks Hete Petersa for joining us, colleagues in the department, students. It's a pleasure to have you with us today. It's very unusual for us to be having a book launch. I think this is one of the very few book launches we've had as a department. So we're quite excited because this year we will be having 3 book launches at least. So it's a bumper year for the department. Today's book launch is for Dr. Evans Ntshengedzeni book, Invisible or Ignored: The Status of Indigenous African Instruments in the Venda Society. There's a copy. You can buy it outside for only 220 Rand. Get it while it's hot off the press. It was published just towards the end of last year. But of course, with books, they gain momentum. And this is one of the opportunities for us to give this project momentum, because it's one that articulates very powerfully with the objectives of our department in terms of research, creative outputs, but especially curriculum transformation. And it's in fact the Curriculum Transformation Committee who instituted the happenings, of which this is a happening. That was instituted last year, and my thanks especially to Boitumelo Kembo and her team who organized this. A lot of work has gone into that. Some of you might be wondering what exactly a happening is. And I won't go into all the details because I'll leave that for my colleagues to unpack. But it's a kind of epistemic disruption. It's an artistic and scholarly event, of which all of ours have involved some kinds of performances or creative work. We had events in the gallery, in the department, and today is also going to feature some performances. So directly after me, we'll have Thomas Masingi, who will perform some poetry, and then we also have Dr. Ntshengedzeni himself, who's going to do some performances of music. So before I give more context to the book itself and the project, I'm going to offer the opportunity to Thomas Masingi to give us the first performance of the day.
Okay. Thank you. Good morning. Come on. Can do better than that. So I was caught between doing 2 pieces. One is called Shoe, and the other one is called Broken Melody. Which ones would you prefer? Shoe. Okay, cool. Trigger warning. Yeah. 6 years old. Feet planted in my father's boots. Realizing I got big shoes to fill. Stacking newspapers in them. Still couldn't fit in. Tried walking a mile in them, but the sole was heavy. Grandma's voice echoing in my head. You're just like your father. Tried to silence it, because the shoe just didn't fit. Let me explain. As a child, for a very long time, I saw my father as a superhero. Wore vintage blazers as capes, bathed in praises from those he helped to escape. Acted clean, but I could still see stains on his hands, for he washed them with the water falling from my mother's optical taps. And that's when I knew that I never wanted the shoe to fit at all. As my feet grew bigger, I refused to walk a mile in his shoes. And besides, I just hated sharp noses. They always reminded me of Pinocchio. Shoes so shiny, he used them as mirrors to fuel his narcissism, a reflection of his empty pride. I never wanted to follow in his footsteps. As if I could see the grave pit he was about to fall in, I think I've morphed into a shoe that sometimes gets worn out, detached from the soul, in need of therapy, but visits to the cobbler could never mend me. It's my sense of humor that always saves me. leaves me in stitches, reattaching me to my soul in the process. And since I wasn't made out of leather, I won't claim to be tough. I'm just tired of society's hypocrisy, telling us that laughter is the best medicine while turning people into walking dispensaries. I ain't got no answers, but I feel that mental health should be addressed differently. I have loosened my laces, because self-lynching is just not something I believe in. Okay, something a little bit happier. From concrete beginnings, we used to collect bricks from construction sites. The ones with holes are our targets. We used them to manufacture cars to transport our visions and dreams, steered by our hands. There was no place too far to reach. From sedans to SUVs, taxis to double-decker buses, we carved our dream cars out of these bricks. We were self-driven, learned how to be F1 racers, taxi and bus drivers. Our mothers owned first aid kits. For when we returned home with knees bleeding, we were young travelers. The fate of our dreams lay in our hands, drove on smooth roads created by the movement of our vehicles. Never worried about gas prices because these cars were fueled by passion. Couldn't afford toy cars, so we created our own. These bricks helped us face reality. Gradually graduated from bricks as time passed by. Our neighbors' fences became more interesting. We were wired to explore. With pliers we tore down their fences, manufactured machines with steering wheels, reinvented the wheel with 330mm cans from bricks to wires. This was a huge upgrade. At least we could finally brand our vehicles, sculpted German machines with wired engines, connected shoestrings to steering wheels, enabling us to swerve, making it easier for us to reach our desired destinations in our journey with me, as I make a U-turn down memory lane to re-experience the joy that those with wireless childhoods never felt.
Thanks very much, Mr. Masingi. For those of you who don't know, Thomas Masingi is a student in the department, also a postgrad assistant. He's also a very talented artist. He had some of his works exhibited last year in the Unisa Art Gallery. So as you can see, a multi-talented performer and artist. Let's give him another round of applause. Right, so to give you a sense of what we're going to be doing today, there is a program, which some of you may have, but for those who are online or watching later, we will have a brief introduction by myself, just setting some context for the discussion to follow. Then we will have some music by Dr Ntshengedzeni, and thereafter we have a roundtable discussion, which is on the topic of the book. And the participants I will introduce when we get to that moment in the program, but they're all from the department, multidisciplinary. And then there'll be an opportunity to do some Q&A. So we hope that there'll be some interaction as well. Store up your questions. We look forward to them. So today's happening focuses on the significance of Indigenous African instruments, and the importance of these instruments and the compositions and performance practices that emerge from them are essential to our project in the department of teaching and learning, and especially curriculum transformation. The role of these instruments cannot be overstated because they foreground Indigenous knowledge systems in a concrete way, while creating affordances whose impact will be generative. When we embarked on the development of our new Bachelor of Music degree back in 2016, we at the same time put in an order for well over 150 instruments, all of them Indigenous African musical instruments. And our project really has been to integrate these instruments into our teaching and learning, both in the Music and History Society modules that we offer, but also in composition and theory modules. In addition to that, our postgraduate students are beginning to work in these areas. So for example, we have a PhD student, Mark Stone, who works on the jill, which is a key instrument, percussion instrument from Ghana. And he's going to actually be offering us a workshop on the Jill later this year, probably in July. Another related initiative is the start of our African Music Ensemble, which we hope to get off the ground later in the year once we are fully staffed in music. And we will be having a composer's concert. So there will be an opportunity to hear our staff performing their music, but also some of our students. And they will have the opportunity to use those instruments from the department. The context for this book, Invisible or Ignored, is a field of music studies that is undergoing rapid transformation after a very long period of stasis. Decolonizing music studies has been a strong refrain for many scholars in the global south, particularly over the last decade. And the decolonial moment that has shaped the humanities and social sciences, at least for the last decade or so, and public discourse on academia in South Africa in particular, aims to recenter our conceptual geographies by making local knowledge its sine qua non and breaking with the normative conditions of Western modernity. As Walter Mignolo explains, and I quote, "Decolonial thinking and doing starts from the analytic of the levels and spheres in which it can be effective in the process of decolonization and liberation from the colonial matrix," end of quote. This matrix imposes hierarchies and a universalism that situates Western modernity at its center. The discourse of decoloniality in the humanities and social sciences, and on what Jean and John Komaroff describe as theory from the South, enjoin us to reconfigure our conceptual imaginaries to voices that for too long have been drowned out by the hegemony of colonial oppression. It is only by recognizing anew the achievements, legacy, and power of African contributions to culture that African and African diasporic institutions can reclaim that heritage. Hence the question, invisible or ignored. What is the power dynamic inherent in this silencing, whether it be intentional or whether it be assumed? So there is urgency to projects documenting the contributions of generations of Black African intellectuals as intellectuals whose work is yet unrecognized and whose presence is either obscured or denied. Efforts to renew curriculum with African indigenous knowledge systems, philosophies, and performance practice have yet to take root in many post-apartheid South African institutions, despite powerful calls for change. It is thus crucial that we begin to foreground projects such as this, which begin to show us how we might use these epistemologies and how these instruments can become generative to new practices. We were delighted, therefore, to recruit Dr. Evans Ntshengedzeni to our department last year. Dr. Ntshengedzeni previously served as a lecturer in the Department of Music at the University of Pretoria. He holds a PhD in music from Wits University and has published in numerous peer-reviewed articles and book chapters on African indigenous instruments. He's presented nationally and internationally at conferences and is also producing creative research outputs as a composer and performer of African instruments. You would have already heard some of these in the performances today. So it's the integration of theory and practice that we hope will be demonstrated by Dr. Ntshengedzeni when he joins us for his presentation. That's all from me. I'm now going to hand over to the good doctor, Dr. Ntshengedzeni.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for making it to this event. It's great that we are able to share knowledge and exchange knowledge. I'm going to give a little bit of context of what I'm going to do or the performance I'm going to render, so that you can understand it better. We're good. You're still checking sound. You know, whenever you are recording, you always have to make sure that sound is good, because if that is not in good order, then we have a challenge. So I'll give a bit of context. So I had the opportunity to go to the deep rural villages in Venda to do research with so many indigenous instrument players. And I have learned a lot from them. I've also learned the instruments themselves. So I taught myself, some I learned from them. I'm going to play a few of them here so that you can sort of have a feel of the sound of this instrument. So the first one that I'm going to play, it's you can just have a look at it. It's actually called chitiringo. Now, it's a traditional flute, and it's made from a bamboo, and coincidentally, we just happen to be in the bamboo room, so that's actually very interesting. So, funny enough, I made this one. So I bought the material, and then I actually just made it myself, learning from them how they actually make these instruments. But the interesting thing about these instruments is that there is not a standard way of making them, or there isn't a proper measurement that you will be using. So you make from your own conscience, or you also make from what you know and what you see. So a very simple example that I'll make, if you can have a look at this, it's got two branches, and both branches have holes. But the understanding would be you would have the same sound both sides, but it's not the same. So I'll just give you a little example there. So I'm just going to play an open note, so you will hear that you won't get the same sound in terms of tone. That's that one. And then I'll come to the other one. Don't know if you can hear that, it's not exactly the same. So basically, that's how they make these instruments. They just make from what exists and at least try to make sure that these instruments continue to live. So now what I'm going to play for you, it's a piece that is played by young boys. This instrument is played by young boys while they are going to the mountain to herd the cattle, goat and sheep, and they use this instrument as a communication kind of a thing where they talk to each other to remind each other that now it's time to go to the mountain. So the one who is playing it would be reminding the friend or the other ones in the village to say, now it's time for us to go to the field. So they play the tune, but this tune is basically a way to communicate. And the other one will also respond with a different tune. Even when they get to the mountain, they do the same when it's time to come back. So the tune that I'm going to play, it's basically a tune to say, it's our time to go now. So the other boys will now hear that, oh, it's time to release our animals. It's time to release the cattle and the goats, the sheep to go to the mountain. And the one who now plays this first, it's the one who reminds everyone that it's time. So it's basically the timekeeper, the person who plays that tune. So now they're already in the mountain. They are playing together there, and now it's time to go. Remember, when they are in the mountain, while the animals are grazing or the cattle are grazing, they will be far apart from each other. So they'll have to make sure that now it's time to go back home. Let's play the music so that we go. So this would be the tune to go home. Okay, sorry about that. That's the one to go. So now they're playing the one, that's the one to go to the mountain. Now they're playing the one to go back home. And that will be their day. They will do this every single day, reminding each other it's time to go to the mountain, it's time to go back home, it's time to go back to the mountain, it's time to go back home. But the interesting thing is that we no longer find these boys these days. They've moved into urban spaces, into developed areas, so it's only the elderly who were young at the time and played this instrument who are now showing us what they used to do to play this instrument for and what they used it for. So it's actually upon these elders to remind the young ones that don't lose this culture. Learn from us, use it, and you will be able to know what we used to do as a culture. Right, so I'm going to the next instrument. Now, this one, it's called Ranga in Venda. But I found it in the Shangaan community. They also play it, it's also played by boys, also going to the mountain as well, but they also play it as a way of having a kind of a performance in the community. So in Venda, the instrument itself is called chipotorio. And these days, they've even changed how it's made. As you can see, most of these instruments are made from natural material. So the tone, the sound, it's determined by the material itself. So I'm going to play this one. So the song that I was playing is called Mavabaza Wata. So it's basically saying Mavabaza. Mavabaza is a person saying Mavabaza Wata. Mavabaza Wata, Wata Mavabaza. So that's how it's played. And it's got a bit of improvisation here and there. Right. So I'm going to the next one. Chris, are we still good in terms of sound? Changing? So I'm going to the boat. Actually, I'm going to play the mbira first before I go to the bow. With the mbira, I actually in Venda it's called mbira zamadeze. There are two types of mbiras. There's one that is called mbira zamadeze and mbira chipai. They differ in a sense that the way they are made, the notes are not the same. Mbira zamadeze has 23 notes, and mbira chipai has about 17 or sometimes less. So the person who actually taught me more about this, he makes these instruments himself. His name is Ntshengedzeni. He also taught me how to make the instrument and also how to play it. So I'm going to play you two tunes. And the one tune, it's basically a secular piece that is well known in the Venda community. It talks about, it's basically a warning to the young boys who are now sort of doing things that the older generation does not understand. By that I mean they become Bentens. I think that's the normal term that is used, which basically means the young boys are basically now dating the older women, and the elder men are trying to use this song to warn them that it's unheard of. We don't do this in our culture, something like that. So that's the first piece. Vana vazvino vayashonisa, vana vazvino vayashonisa. Ndidotuwa vasale vachitakala vo, ndidotuwa vasale vachitakala. Vatanga vazvino vayashonisa we, vavoseyana vabana zvikeguru, vakeguru vononga vomarandera. Helele, auwe, helele, auwe. Vatanga vazvino vayashonisa we, vatanga vazvino vayashonisa. Vavoseyana vabva chikeguru, vakeguru vononga vomarandera we. Helele, auwe, helele, auwe. Ndidotuwa vasale vachitakala vo, ndidotuwa vasale vachitakala. Helele, auwe, helele, auwe. Vatanga vazvino vayashonisa we, vatanga vazvino vayashonisa. Vavoseyana vabva chikeguru we. Helele, auwe, helele, auwe. Helele, vatanga vazvino vayashonisa we, vavoseyana vabva chikeguru we, vavoseyana vabva chikeguru. Helele, auwe, helele, auwe. Okay, so that's the first piece. Now, having learned from them and seen how they played, I also composed my own. So I'm going to play my own composition. This one, it's talking about boys again, but it's basically reminding them to respect young ladies and not to be naughty in the community. So basically, because I learned how they compose and what kind of messaging they're trying to do, I'm also sort of composing in that style so that it sort of goes with the kind of messaging they do. Vasitana vano maduva, vasitana vano maduva, vafuneza chikoro, uelele, uelele. Avafuneza chikoro, vafunesa vatukana, avafuneza chikoro, uelele, uelele. Vasitana vano maduva, vasitana vano maduva. Avafuneza chikoro, uelele. Vafunesa vatukana, vafunesa vatukana. Uelele, uelele. Avafuneza chikoro, avavari na zibugu. Vafunesa vatukana, uelele. uwelele, uwelele, bafunesa batukana, ababali na zibugu, abayi na chikoloni, uwelele, 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 uwa, 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 abafunisa chikulu, bafunesa batukana, uwelele, basizana bano maduba, basizana bano maduba, uwelele. All right. So now I'm going to the bow. The bow instrument, we have two types of bow instruments in the Venda community. One, it's called dende, which is this one here. And another one, it's called chiwana. So the difference between the two is that chiwana is played by women and dende is played by men. And chiwana normally doesn't have the gog. So they would use their mouth to amplify the sound towards the end here. But I'm going to use it differently. I'm going to use it like dende. There's a particular song I want to play. Thank you. So now with the dende instrument or the chiwana instrument, there's always overtones when you're playing the instrument. So you should try to listen for the overtones. And even the singing sort of emulates the overtone. So the song that I'm going to play, it's called Let's Play Hide and Seek. It's a song for kids. I also composed it as well. Tambane chibune, tambane chiswate, ritamba chiswate. Tambane chibune, ritamba chiswate, tambane chibune. Tambane chibune, tambane chiswate. Tambane chibune, tambane chiswate. Tambane chibune, tambane chiswate. Savana baba Venda, savana baba Venda. Tambane chibune, tambane chiswate. So I'm sure you might have seen that I keep pushing it back and forth. So that's how we control the overtones. So the gog, the more you bring it closer to yourself or to your chest, it produces different types of overtones. Right, so I'm going to go to the next one. The one that is played by men, which is called dende. So the first song I'll play, I also composed it, and the second one, I lent it from the one of the famous players in Venda who plays this instrument a lot. And again, I composed it, the one that I composed within the style of this type of music. I didn't explain this one. So the one that I'm going to play, it's called Mashudu. Mashudu, it's a young man who always likes to come back home late, and his father is trying to warn him that there are things that always happen when you come back late. It's either you are hurt or you are in trouble, so come back home in time. So basically the song is just warning this person called Mashudu to say, come back home in time.
Alikoveli na mwananga, alikoveli na mwananga. Oh, ah, oh, ah. Alikoveli na mwananga, alikoveli na mwananga. Ini mashudu aye. Ah, oh, ah, ah, oh, ah. Ini mashudu aye mwananga, alikoveli na mwananga. Ahe mwananga, ahe mwananga. Alikoveli na mwananga, ini mashudu aye mwananga. Anilivo nilokovelana, ahu alikoveli na mwananga, ini mashudu aye mwananga. Alikoveli na mwananga, hai hai hai. Alikoveli na mwananga, alikoveli na mwananga. Ini mashudu aye mwananga, All right, so the last piece I'm going to perform is called Chituturu. Chituturu is basically a very famous piece in the Venda community. It talks about what men do and what women don't do. So basically it's about gender, roles in the community, and what men are supposed to do and what they're not supposed to do. But it's called Chituturu. So this one, I tune it up. Okay. Chituturu chitutu chava Venda, chituturu chitutu chava Venda. Chisatendi ugai wanga vavanzi, chisatendi ugai wanga vatsinda, chinotodo ugai wanga vasadzi. Aredi haninge havakoma, aredi haninge havakoma. Oi oi oi, eleuea. Aredi aninge havakoma, chituturu chitutu chava Venda. Chisatendi ugai wanga vatsinda, chinotodo ugai wanga vavenda. Aredi aninge havakoma. Oi oi oi, eleuea. Chituturu chitutu chava Venda, chituturu chitutu chava Venda. Chisatendi ugai wanga vatsinda, chisatendi ugai wanga vatsinda chinotodo ugai wanga vavenda aredi aninge ihava venda aredi aninge ihava koma oi oi ho oluhue oi oi ho elehue ya eleleuwe elehue ya chitutu charutumbe ndi chitutu chichutu charutumbe chisatendi ugai wanga vasadzi chinotodo ugai wanga vavenda aredi aninge ihava koma hey hey alahuya. Right, that is the end of my performance.
Thank you very much, Dr. Ntshengedzeni. Can we have another round of applause? Right, we're just adjusting the cameras before we get started with the roundtable discussion. But if I can just introduce the panelists to you. Thanks to Dr. Jeffery for the sound today and the video. Okay. So we have our panelist, Dr. Ntshengedzeni. Seated next to him is Mr. Lawrence Lemaoana from Visual Arts, also in the department. Then we have our head of music, Mr. Bernett Nkwayi Mulungo. And then we have Dr. Annemie Behr, seated on the far left. So, may I hand over to our chair, Boitumelo Kembo.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Properly, I'm also part of the roundtable discussion. We gathered here today because Dr. Ntshengedzeni has started a very important conversation. He's written the first paragraph in the book that we, as the curriculum transformation committee in the department, have committed ourselves to, the scholarship that we have committed ourselves to. So we are seated here, all from our different specializations, and we want to contribute to the paragraph that Dr. Ntshengedzeni has started writing. And we are contributing to this paragraph from our own specialization. So I'll contribute to the conversation from my perspective as an art historian, and Dr. Behr will do the same from the perspective of the musicologist, and Mr. Mulungo will do the same again from the perspective of the musicologist, and Dr. Lemaoana will also do the same from the perspective of the visual artist. And of course, Dr. Ntshengedzeni, you will lead the discussions. So colleagues, we want to make this as engaging as possible. We thank you for the time that you've taken away from your busy schedules to grace us with your presence. So without any further ado, I will give it over to Dr. Ntshengedzeni, and we will start the conversations.
Thank you so much, Makembo. As you could see, I was trying to be the jack of all trades, playing all these various instruments. It's not easy. Most of these people, you find out that they specialize at least in one instrument or two. So I wanted to learn these instruments because it's mainly the elderly, and once they depart from this world, that knowledge is gone. So if we can do our best to try and make sure that we
bring this down to the younger generation. But I think the most important discussion should be the academic discussion about this knowledge. What are we doing about it as academics? What's our role in making sure that we try to preserve some of this knowledge? And maybe in the near future, it may not happen in our generation. In the near future, they will be able to find solutions in terms of bringing this knowledge to academia, and students can start learning at institutions of higher learning. South Africa, we've got about 26, I don't know if it's now 27 universities, but I think if my memory serves me well, it's 26 universities. And with all these universities, it's very difficult to really pinpoint one to say they at least offer indigenous instruments or indigenous knowledge. I know Cape Town tries, but still, it's still within the ambit of research in most cases. So this book, for me, was trying to sort of tap into that conscious of how can we as scholars maybe try to find a way of bringing this knowledge in terms of practice to the university, and maybe we can find a solution. I've got 4 of my panelists who maybe can also speak to that discussion, and from what they've read as well, and from their contribution. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Doctor. So I was reading your book, and I had all these burning questions, and I think you also kind of maybe presenting them as we speak. There's for me, a conflict of power dynamics, and the power that for example, I notice in your book is about specific functions of the performers, in terms of gender, in terms of context, but also the one that was for me a kind of flare up was the power of the chief to allow certain performances to happen, in certain contexts. So for me, in terms of the question of when we do engage with this music, the sounds and so on, what is the take, or what is lost in this transition from the context of the rural or the periphery in relation to the center that is the university? And for me, the questions about how does the music kind of translate to something that is academic, or what does the academic translate to in terms of allowing that context of sound to be as powerful as possible?
Thank you so much. I think we have a very unique situation here in Africa, not only in South Africa, in Africa at large, where indigenous knowledge is still considered music of the low class, music of the communities, and music that is controlled by senior authorities within the communities. So I use Venda as an example, or as a case study, where, when John Blacking went to Venda to conduct his research in 1956 to 1958, he also found out that music is still very much controlled by the chiefs and the kings, and they have so much power in terms of what the community will believe and know in terms of music. But we have this group of individual instrument players who are always isolated. When there are these communal performances, they are not called, they are not invited, they are on their own, if you will. And my idea was to zoom into this area to say, why are they ignored? Why are they not given the platform? Most of them, when I engage with them, they even feel like, at least in their lifetime, someone is giving them attention. a person is giving them attention, because no one gives them attention in the community. And they feel like at least someone is interested in what they do. So I think looking at that, as an academic, you know, when we study music, you're always told that you should play first instrument. I had the ambition of playing an indigenous instrument as a first instrument, but it was not going to be possible where I studied. So if we could get to a point where we can change that, bring that music into a space where it's given a higher status, if you will, not comparing with anything, but to say it is music that people are passionate about, they grew up playing and performing, and it could also be studied. So when we are appropriating the indigenous knowledge, we should also think of which ways and how can we actually bring this knowledge that has previously been excluded in academia, so that it can actually empower our own people, not to hog the space. But you know, it's very discouraging as a student. You go to university, you find out that what you want to learn, it's not there. You move around all these 26 universities, you still can't find it, but you want to study. So you just go with what exists. And if we want to change that situation, we ourselves have to say, we have to document and write so that there will be content. Because if we are not writing, universities will still hide by the fact that where is the content you want to teach? But if we're documenting and writing it, yes, the content exists. So let us as academics make content available. I don't know if that answered your question.
It does, but also that I think for me it's the question of even just the notion of authenticity, right? So if an instrument is kind of geared towards being played by males, does it mean that in the university only males of a certain age will be able to kind of play that, or because I think for me that even the word that you kind of use in the book is holistic, and the fact that some of the sounds, for example, link to the way in which Venda is spoken, and for me that was a really interesting kind of particularity that for me becomes what mechanism do we use to allow that particularity to still be, you know, a form of content creation, but also in terms of you know, being critical of what is being produced.
Thank you so much. There are many debates in the music field where scholars are for appropriating this indigenous knowledge into education. Some are not for it, and with very valid reasons. When you talk about authenticity, there's always this issue of, is it appropriate? Is it right when we bring these instruments in academia? Why don't we leave them there where they thrive, where they are known, where they are used best? And the issue of instruments that are meant for particular gender, it's something that I, as an academic, I think we should overcome it as Africans. I'll give you my reasons. Because if you dig deeper to why they started saying this instrument is played by women and this one is played by men, you'll find out that the reason it's not strong enough to continue with that kind of narrative further. Because I'll give you the example of the Venda community. The one that is played by women, there is actually no reason when I asked them why is it played by women. They just said, well, it's women who play it. And it ends there. So there is not really a good reason why. So if we use that to say, okay, if we bring these instruments to academia, so are we going to now restrict certain gender from playing particular instruments? And some reasons were maybe valid at the time, but you only find out that there is actually no reason why we should restrict our students from learning all these instruments. all the instruments that I was playing, by the way, in some areas or some villages, you will be told this one is played by men, this one is. I played all of them. Did I break the rules? Yes. Is it necessary? It's a question we can ask ourselves going forward. Thank you.
Colleagues, I'm going to talk to our audience about reflections that I had as I was going through the book, and I noted, I've always noted that the term indigenous, is always going to be very particularly contentious, and in some contexts, it's associated with things that are dirty, are unworthy, and it carries layers of complexity, of nuances of language, and everyday acts of being indigenous that make the indigenous story a profoundly rich global story of human experience. Global story. You see, that is what for me, that's what caught my eye. Because when I read your book, Dr. Ntshengedzeni, I thought to myself, we should be consciously engaging in using the tools of the empire to write back to the empire, to create a conversation with the empire. And the aim here is not Eurocentrism, Afrocentrism. The aim here is being polycentric, where we can create a society, or we can write about a society where you can be Eurocentric, you can be Afrocentric, and the Afrocentric school of thought will have respect for the Eurocentric school of thought, whereby all the schools of thought can exist within the academy, and we can all and we can teach our students these things, and the students can decide for themselves what they want to do and which school of thought do they want to speak to, create to, see from, talk about. Because our aim as the Curriculum Transformation Committee in this department, through and by Dr. Ntshengedze's book, is to start critical and much needed discussions about curriculum transformation in each of the disciplines in our department. And although the book specifically speaks to the specialization of music, our endeavor is to relate his work to the different specializations within the department. Within art history, the one thing that popped out as I was going through the book is the notion of research paradigms. And the lesson that I took from Dr. Ntshengedze's book is lessons about the transformative and indigenous research paradigms, and the various ways that as art historians we can operate within the transformative and the indigenous paradigm. And if we can also combine the indigenous and the transformative paradigm to create a whole other paradigm. The transformative and indigenous paradigms empower Africans with the sovereignty and the self-reliance needed to rebuild post-colonial societies. And perhaps someone will ask me, who is African? Who is indigenous? And my answer to that question is the answer and the thought that we have adopted as the Transformation Committee in this department. We have decided that being African is a way of being, and being African has got nothing to do with race or skin pigment, that being African is a mental attitude. And all of the academics that are sitting here at UNISA are committed to Africanization of the curriculum, but not that we are writing off the curriculum that is existing, not that we are deciding that the canon has now become redundant, but because we want to talk to the canon. We want responses from the canon. We want to talk with the canon. We want to challenge the canon so that we can create a whole new way of seeing, of being, and most importantly, of creating. Thank you.
Enhlekan, that's afternoon. Good afternoon in Tsonga. as I was reading the book, it led me to a lot of questions that I've had myself throughout my studies about our African music and bringing it to the already established Western structured programs. But in your book, you speak to the idea of bringing in the technical aspect of the playing or the teaching of the instruments. So you were speaking to issues of when you're teaching Western instruments, you already have scales, arpeggios that you have to go through. But then now you were saying for the African instrument, there isn't such. And in the process of bringing this music into academic space, we need to get this approach onto our musical instruments so that it can be seen or viewed on par or at the level of those instruments, of the established Western instruments. Now, my question is, if the musicians that play these instruments themselves are proficient in how they play them without having undergone that, do we need that to be imposed onto the teaching of these musical instruments? Why can't we look at what is it that these musicians are already doing and be able to then bring that into the teaching of the instruments so that one doesn't really supersede the other? You're teaching it in its purity.
I think I may answer that one. Is the mic here? I think you just need to bring it closer to your mouth. Yeah, but could you hear them? Okay, good. Oh, all right. So I was too close, so I was advised to also take it a bit further. So you have a very valid point, Mr. Mulungo, because in fact, when I was mentioning those technicalities, I was saying, reason why these instruments are sort of judged so low, it's because they don't have those technicalities. They don't have exercise. When you learn these instruments, you start by learning a song. You don't start by playing arpeggios and scales and what have you. You just engage, you start playing a song. That's it. That's how you learn. And in most cases, you are never taught. You learn by observing. And I think it's a question we need to bring to ourselves as academics to say, why don't we also appropriate this way of learning? I know it's very problematic because the university would think, why do we have students if they're coming to teach themselves? They can still teach, they can teach themselves where they are. They don't need to come to the university. But we need to find ways of saying, even if they are self-taught or they're teaching themselves or navigating their ways around playing these instruments, what sort of assessment can we have in place? Because as an institution, we exist because we assess what they do. So if we don't have a form of assessment, then that's where we will fail them. But we need to say, within the ambit of these instruments, within their status, there is a way we can find a solution in terms of assessing them if we say they are playing that instrument and they don't have a teacher, or we find a teacher from the village. Again, another problematic thing, you find a teacher from the village. Universities, they will want someone with a certificate. They want to employ someone with a certificate. And the magogo in the village doesn't have the certificate, and she's the pro. She knows the instrument well. She plays it better than anyone that you know. But just because she doesn't have the instrument, the magogo cannot teach the students. It's very, yeah, we can give an honorary one. So it's very problematic. So Mr. Mulungo was saying, let's also not use those technicalities as a way to disadvantage this instrument. We still need to find a way of using them the way they are. So in other words, we need to be able to say there is a Western way of learning instruments. There's also an indigenous way of learning instruments. But we need to also absorb it and see if that would work for us. I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, it does. But I'll hand over to my colleague and then I will ask again.
Are you sure you do want to? So my response to the book is threefold. First, it comprises a congratulations and then a very clumsy compliment, followed by a question. So it sounds like it's all worked out, but I'm afraid I'm going to fumble my way through this. First, I want to congratulate you on this book. It is beautiful. I believe it is your first publication. I mean, not your first publication, your first book publication. Widely published, widely spoken at conferences, widely known, but your first book publication. So my prayer would be that this book remains special for the remainder of your career, because many will follow. But this is your first. So congratulations. Now, what makes my compliment clumsy is the fact that, right, so I did have it worked out and now I lost it. Is that I'm nervous about giving the compliment because I don't know how it is going to be received. I'm not sitting here feeling myself an imposter, because we are a team in our goal, in our vision, in our mission to transform the music curriculum. I do it from the angle of Western art music. You do it from the angle of African music. So we are a team in that effort, and this is what brings us together in this conversation. However, I am also aware of my ignorances and the things that I do not know about your field, which makes me rather vulnerable in this intercultural, interracial conversation. So when I give my compliment, I believe, I trust that you will receive it with the sincerity that I give it. When I read the book, I want to compliment you on the tone of it. I find the tone of the argument you put across very gentle. It's not strident. It's not in your face. It's not provocative. It is straightforward. It puts down the challenges. It gives practical solutions. And it is a deep thinking about the issues that we face. When I say gentle, I do not mean timid, because it's not timid. It's very confident in what it has to say. It's also there was another adjective that I can't remember now. But be that as it may, what struck me in your description of the what's the bow, the musical bow for the woman, is how you describe the musical bow as giving a voice to a female, because she puts it in her mouth and has the opportunity to say what she does not have always have a chance to say. And she does it in a sound that is close to her heart, that is intimate, but that gives her a chance to put her message across. And the tone of your book, for me, is that. It feels to me like this book is the voice that you are giving the Venda community, if not the society, then at least their instruments. And I find that very attractive about your book. But the gentleness of it, nevertheless, makes it vulnerable. And it's a vulnerability that you speak about in the book as well. The vulnerability of the instruments. It's a vulnerability of the culture. It's a vulnerability of the practice. Which brings me to a question on the title, right? Because that vulnerability is in the title when we ask invisible or ignored. The choice of words, though, I find interesting because it's not sound related. To say it's invisible, it's about visuality. And to talk about something being ignored, the idea of sound is incorporated in that concept, but it's both visual and sonic. It's pretending in some cases not to hear or not to see, or sometimes it's deliberately choosing to look away and to shut off the ears and not take notice of something. In this case, the South African instruments of the Venda society. But if the subtitle refers to the status of Indigenous South African instruments in the Venda society, and so the instruments itself refers to physicality. So in the title, we do have, you managed to capture the idea of musical arts, as Masingi puts it forward, in a sense that it's not simply sound. It's an integrated, holistic experience that includes traditional costume, visuality. It includes the physicality, the materiality of the instruments. You use the word performance texture in your book, which I find a very good encapsulation of what is happening within the African musical arts. So I would like to know, my question then, this is the end of the clumsy compliment, moving into the question. It's a question about the title. I want you to explain to us which spirit whispered the title in your ear and what is the core of its message.
Thank you so much, Dr. Behr. I think in one way or another in our lives, we have experienced being ignored or feeling like we're invisible while we're there, right? And I think for me, it was the voice of these indigenous instrument players who feel like they're not part of the society, but they are there. And no one sees them. And they also play these instruments. And whenever there is a gig or a performance, they always call the popular musicians. And these indigenous instrument players, they are ignored. It's like they're not even there. So I looked at how we as human beings, in one way or another in our life, we have experienced this feeling of being ignored and being invisible while we are there. We know we are there. You know, I'll give a very good example. There was a time I was still working at Vets, and we were in a meeting and we were talking, and you raise your point and someone comes and says, I think Evans is trying to say this. Now, process that thought. Process it. It looks like what you said doesn't make sense. Or you didn't say it right. So right there you are being ignored. It's like you're not there. You have a point you're making, but someone is not acknowledging your point. So it's this situation, Dr. Behr, where I felt that we as musicians, as artists, as practitioners, we have the feeling of being ignored. And if we can sympathize with someone who has been in that feeling, we will be able to understand what it feels for someone to actually say, I'm being ignored, I'm not taken serious. So that is where I had so many titles that in fact, I wanted to change the title to the importance of indigenous instrument education. And lucky enough, they said, well, you've already said invisible and ignored, so we're going to go with invisible and ignored. But I think it was key to have that topic in, because that was the initial topic I had. But as I was writing, I thought, let me focus more on the education part of it instead of talking about these people who are nobody in the society, and they feel that way. When I speak to them, they tell me that, we are grateful you have come to us, you are talking to us, you are interested in what we are doing. So maybe if we look at it from that perspective, put it as a question. Are they really invisible or they are just ignored? Maybe we'll be able to find solution to that. Thank you.
Colleagues, I'm looking at our time, the time that we had for the roundtable discussion, and I see that Prof. Charlie has just walked in. So I am going to quickly read something in closing the roundtable discussion, and then I'll hand back. I'll hand back to Prof. Puli to speak, to invite Prof. Charlie to say a thing or two before we open the Q&A. Yes, and Mr. Mulungo has got one more question he's dying to ask. So I will hand over the mic before I read what I want to read.
Okay. Sorry to disturb your plan. It's more on the idea of transcription. Myself and you, we've been involved in different platforms dealing with transcribing our African music into music notation, specifically Western music notation. So there's this idea that when we are transcribing, what is it? There's something that is lost in the music. And when you look at it from the Western perspective, is that most of the music notation is already done by the composer. But then when you come to our indigenous African music, we are actually working backwards in terms of we are going now to the archives, and we are the ones that are transcribing that music, not as the composers, and we don't have access to the composer to even ask, but also the ones that we have access to, they don't have the understanding or knowledge of the notation system. So my question is to you, and I know you might not have the answer now because I'm also still grappling with that, but what is it that we can do to actually get as much information onto the notated scores when we take that approach as form of documentation and also for teaching and learning later? Then I'm done, Kembo. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mulungo. You are touching on a very important topic. There have been so many discussions and disagreements among scholars in terms of notation. Should we notate in African music? If we should, what notation system should we use? And of course, Western classical notation, which is the staff notation, exists. And Africans are also trying to find ways of bringing, because as you said, there is always something we lose when we notate. They are trying to find ways of adding to that existing notation, because as it is, we don't have one standard notation of our own. We do have various that have been developed, like the Western ensemble, African ensemble notation, the Mbira ensemble, but it doesn't incorporate all. So in a way, we still have this model of Western notation. I believe we should use it and add what is missing, what we think the notation is not representing. And that way, because even Western performers and composers, they do feel that indeed Western classical notation is limiting. It's not able to portray everything they want to. So we can all then add and find a way to say, let's not miss anything when we notate, but let's try to capture as much as we can and explain what it means. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, colleagues, I would like to close this roundtable discussion with reference to two concepts. And Linda Smith writes extensively about these two concepts when she talks about decolonizing methodologies. Specifically, I want to talk about the notion of survivance, as well as the notion of intervening. So, according to Gerald Vezono, survivance is survival and resistance, and the celebration of survival having resisted. So basically what I'm saying here, colleagues, is if these musical instruments have survived being ignored, being invisibilized, being thrown to the periphery, it is time that we partake in the act of intervening. And intervening takes action in research and means literally the process of being proactive and becoming involved as interested workers for change in intervention-based projects, such as the project that has now been started by Dr. Ntshengedzeni. And inasmuch as we know that every generation has a legacy, I strongly believe that this is going to be the legacy of the current ladies and gentlemen, producers, seers, theorists, musicians, pens men and pens women that are currently employed in the Department of Arts and Music. Prof. Puli, over to you.
Thank you very much to the panel. It was a very stimulating start to our discussion, but we still have time for some questions and answers. Before I open the floor, Prof. Charlie, would you like to say a word or two? So Professor Charlie is our school director.
Thanks, Prof. I think that really the idea of coming here was just to sit in and listen to the intellectual conversations that they are unfolding. And so I really did not want to say something from the side of the deanery, but just to come here as myself as an academic to just listen. I should apologize. I had meant to be here from 10:30. Unfortunately, I was held somewhere taking to Prof. Puli. And I'm only coming now. From the side of the deanery, Prof, just two quick points. One being that, and I was in discussion with the dean yesterday, she really appreciates initiatives such as these ones. You would also recall, Professor Pudi, that there is an ongoing conversation of more similar initiatives, such as this one, where the entire university could come together. There was an idea of what I've called the Jazz Fridays, once a month, where everyone could just come together and really socialize and make conversations similar to this one. So in our conversation yesterday, she really admitted the fact that she really appreciates this. But secondly, I think that the college and the university is looking to this department to do a few matters or to engage in similar ones. You would recall that the College Management Committee recently approved a residency for this particular department, working together with the Art Gallery. It's one way in which the college and I think the university is trying to encourage the department to pursue and continue the work that it is doing. Those are essentially the two ones that come at the top of my head in terms of what the deanery is interested in, but also just to encourage the work that is ongoing in terms of the department itself. So thank you so much, Prof. As I said, I did not mean to say anything, just to come and listen to the stimulating conversations. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Prof. Charlie. Yes, the idea of Jazz Friday sounds fantastic to me. Maybe not just jazz. We will have all our musics represented, but I think it's a very exciting opportunity. So let me not hold this up any further. Are there questions, comments from the floor? Okay, let's start. Prof. Sigalo.
Thank you so much. Dr. Ntshengedzeni, you both are not ready, but just listening to the talk around the book, but also listening to you play the music instruments, really got me excited. I'm very passionate about the project of Africanization, decolonization. My work centers around that. So I've been listening very closely, and so many things come to my mind. I'm very excited and looking forward to more projects and to see where this work is going. You spoke about the idea of learning, and I have this question: how do we define what learning is? Because when you're talking about the instruments and saying what happens if we're saying the students should teach themselves, why should they come to university to come and teach themselves? And it reminded me of Professor Odora Hopper's idea of rethinking thinking. What we understand as thinking, what counts as thinking, what counts as knowledge. And I wonder whether we can also rethink learning. What counts as learning? What would it mean for students to learn with each other, among one another? And what would the process be like? And what can it do for us in terms of learning these musical instruments? And then just lastly, the idea of transcribing and what that would look like. I think that's a very important point as we think about what happens in the process of transcription. It's something that we often think about even in talking, in interviews. What happens when I translate from Venda to English, really thinking about the metaphors, the histories that are embedded in the languages. So I worry a little bit, and I think for me, this is a challenge to you colleagues, as you say, you're doing this work, something to continuously reflect on, and the transcribing to make it legible for code, transcribing to make it legible to the Western ear, to fit into a particular world that's already created, that is the university. So what will this music look like within an academic space? So we want to transcribe because we want to make it legible for an already existing system and structure. And what would happen if we choose not to transcribe this music? What gets lost in the translation, so to speak? And this speaks to the challenges of wanting to standardize. Because the music instruments that we're talking about and giving us the background, for me, it sounded very important to think about what those instruments serve and the music that they create serve. So it's also about social commentary. It's about reflecting on what's happening in the community, what's happening in the environment, what's happening to the social world, and creating and using these instruments from nature itself, because if you look at the material, but also using it to reflect on society, to speak to society. And so the idea of call and response, playing when you go out there and playing when you come back, and that idea of accompaniment as you do this work. And so I think in our quest to try and look at what is the space for these instruments, for this work within academic spaces, let's also, at the same time, think about what really does it mean to Africanize and to decolonize do we really have to transcribe, and what would it mean when we notate this work in terms of what it will do to the communities? What would happen if we choose not to? What possibilities are there? And I think this is a challenge to all of us in all the different kinds of work that we're doing in our quest to decolonize and really be deliberate about it, in rethinking the university, in rethinking learning. So, but thank you so much for getting all these things in my head. Very excited about the work that you're doing.
Welcome on board. Yeah, I think I like academic environment because it enables us to be robust and to think, to challenge the norms, right? And to want to find ways of, or other ways, other than what already exists. And I think that is what it's all about. Is it only what we are exposed to that we can learn from? You know, the point you're raising, what does it mean to learn? And there are many ways to answer that. And there are many different ways to view what it means to learn. And of course, as academics, we need to really think in terms of institutions. What is their model of learning? And is it inclusive? If it's not, why can't we find other ways of learning and find ways of making sure that these new ways of learning are also taken serious and are appropriated, so that there is, there is not this situation where we always feel like we are in Africa, we are Africans, but we can't learn African knowledge. Thank you.
Right, I think there was a question here.
Thank you, sir. Congratulations. Internationally, this is keep the store. Oh, sorry about that. Okay, but just say congratulations on Dr. Ntshengedzeni is a keep up this book. I'm a PhD candidate in the College of Accounting Sciences. My research focus on financial practices in rural areas. Coincidentally, my research site is in Venda. The discussing about personal finances is considered taboo. Yeah. And reflecting on during the time of struggle, the role of music during those times was important, especially jazz songs were entertaining the struggle. So I've become intrigued by the idea of exploring existing songs, money-related, money-in songs. So I started searching for money songs because it's very difficult for people to talk about money and their personal finance. It's considered taboo. So many people use songs to express themselves about their financial lives. So I'm just hoping I'll buy the book today. And I'm hoping Dr. Ntshengedzeni will also direct me to the relevant indigenous songs that explore money songs. And I'm not sure if they existed or thank you.
Thank you so much, and I hope you do well in your PhD and complete it soon. All the best with that. Yeah, I'll do my best to give you my archive and also try to find some of the indigenous practitioners I have worked with. Yes, you'll definitely find songs that do speak to money. Music speaks to anything. As long as they are able to say what they want to say, music is the right platform to use. Yeah, so we should engage after this. Thank you.
All right, let me go first to the audience, and then I've seen Dr. Behr. Tsegofatso, Sioka.
Dr. Ewing, and Dr. Netshivhambe, thank you so much for the book and the wonderful performance that you just did for us. My question is relative to the performance that just happened. When you were, with every single instrument that you introduced, you spoke of its role within the community or different communities in Venda. And what I noted was the songs that were created either for coming of age or rites of passage, as well as behavioral concerns and warnings. But all of them was from a male perspective. So I wanted to ask that is there a feminine counterpart where such teachings and learnings are happening for young girls and women, or do you practice the male ones because you are male and not a
Okay, thank you so much. Yes, you do have feminist songs and music that speaks to femininity. However, yeah, I learned mostly the ones that speak to masculinity, and not that I'm against the ones that are not speaking for that. I think one would have to spend more time with female players to really understand more about their concerns, their ways of seeing life, their ways of voicing their problems in life. But I've spent more time with men, and even within men's songs, you still find songs that talk to women and what have you.
Right. Are there any? Okay, got one more up there.
Thank you very much, Doctor. So my question also like to ask in regards to the cross music and the cross environment monitoring system. It sounds the instruments, they make sense or sound if they are being played or practiced outside the Institute of Higher Learning. So I want to know what change will it bring if we bring the instruments in the court or in the relevant training, for instance, like the Institute of Higher Learning. And also we'd like to understand, does the music or instrument cut across boundaries, discipline, culture? Sometimes we would like to understand would the African music would have its own leg to stand on, and culture on its own leg has a leg to stand on. So inside the institution of higher learning, like university, is it a common ground for Dr. Musuya to consider at the start in that regard? Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you so much for your questions. Yeah, the biggest challenge with these instruments is the sound itself. The sound quality is not so good. You need to have some form of amplification because they are so soft. It's how they are built, how they are designed. So I think if one was to bring them to academia, that would be my first challenge to look into, which is to make sure that they are loud enough. So if we didn't have a microphone or anything to amplify the sound, you were probably not going to hear well for those who are right at the back. And this is not the only challenge experienced in Africa. I mean, even other instruments, they do have that. But yes, making sure that they are audible enough and anyone can hear them. So that would be the first thing to do if we're bringing them to academia, finding ways of making sure that they are loud and they are, maybe loud is not the right word, anyone can hear them while you're playing them. The second one, where you talking about how can these institutions really find ways to absorb this knowledge? Yes, they can. It's just a matter of us being robust and us making the institutions see that it's important. It's our knowledge and we know it and we want it to be, learned at institutions of higher learning. Thank you.
Right, I'll take the last round. Are there any more questions? Okay, so I've got Andisi Radiko and Ndabo. Anybody else? Okay, and then we'll have Annemie. So let's ask the 3 questions, and then we'll go back to Evan, starting with Andisiwe.
Thank you, Prof. It's not necessarily, okay, it is a question, I suppose, but it's also to commend your approach in archiving the music, that you actually went into the spaces and you were taught by the people. You actually sat down and learned the instruments as they taught you. You didn't just go there and record the music and then take it and present it. Because for me, I am quite interested in how, the practice of archiving indigenous instruments, whether it's music, whether it's artifacts. So it was really interesting that you actually sat and allowed yourself to be taught, because there are questions I still also have from what Prof. Sekano mentioned. I was reminded about the sort of challenges that arise when you want to transcribe, and I was looking at one of Spivak's, quotes in the Burden of English, where she iterates that the mechanics of language are not problematic in literature. However, text is constructed with an implied reader who is constructed within a consolidated system of cultural representation. So this means that the reader or viewer is taught to think within a certain framework. And with music, I kind of remember how, Xhosa songs where the woman goes to the river, and there's this specific one where the woman will say, that Kolani's dad is a dark-skinned man, doesn't actually mean that he's a dark-skinned man when you directly translate it. It means that he is dangerous. The woman is trying to tell the story that she's living with this very dangerous, evil man who probably is abusive. So the meaning is lost in translation when it's directly translated. However, the meaning you would have to find from the woman, because the woman understands that they can't say it, or in that moment during that period, they wouldn't say it directly verbatim. They would use words like, this kana, or that, to sort of mean something that the others would understand that she means that she is in abusive marriage. So that kind of meaning gets lost when it's directly translated, because the transcribed song would say that Kolani's dad is a dark-skinned wax. So it's in that aspect that the nuances are sort of lost in transcription. So how do you find ways around that when you're archiving? Because the next generation obviously will not be sitting down with the lady who sang the song. They will be sitting down with the text. They will be sitting down with the lyrics and the way the song goes. And I suppose this is why we have to sort of find ways in which we structure, or we sort of record our history without tampering with it. Finding ways, maybe recording the audio, but once you transcribe and all they have perhaps is the transcription and the audio, we need to also sit down with the authors and actually get, as much as we can of what the meaning was. And I know it's difficult because we're living in an age where, most of these authors are no longer with us on the planet. So how do we tackle these challenges when we want the history to be archived, but we're faced with the reality that maybe some of what we've been actually archiving isn't quite accurate? Because the meaning wasn't that she's a black-skinned man, it was that she's an abusive man.
Thank you so much. The first one, yes. When I asked the Mbira player to teach me, guess what he told me? He just said, observe. And I was frustrating, because I see what he's doing, but I don't see it at the same time. I'm struggling. I want someone to help, but he just says, see, look. That's how you learn. So it's an interesting way of learning, where you have to struggle with yourself and find a way. And in that way of learning, you also improvise. You don't reproduce exactly what he is doing. You find other ways, as long as it's similar, it's closer. And as long as you're satisfied that I have learned, I've managed to reproduce. Now, the issue of transcription, yes, it's a very big discussion all over the world. Mr. Mulungo was actually referring to the issue of transcribing audio into sheet music. We still keep the original text, the African text, but of course, you still have to explain in English what it means, and that's where meaning gets lost most of the time. But the good thing is, at least the original text is there.
someone can still critique and say, this line does not really mean what's there. Yeah, thank you.
I think my ear spoke.
Yeah, go to the next mic if that one is not working. Oh, there you go.
This one that works. Thank you. Thank you so much for this platform, and congratulations to Ntshengedzeni. There's just 2 points that I wanted to address before I ask the question. I think they'll both speak to what I want to ask. The first one is when I heard on the other side, if I understood correctly, was what contribution would implementing such in higher learning, what contribution it would have. I think we could ask the same with what already is incorporated into our syllabus, which is Western arts. We've never asked those kind of questions. So I think it's a question that we should maybe try and avoid, because it's something that hasn't been implemented as yet, and something that is yet to grow, should it be to an extent. That's the first one I wanted to speak about. And the other one was transcription. So transcription is not I guess it was a big thing as well in the Western arts, but it's very important for us not to forget that as much as this touches so much in Africanization of things, that it's also a form of art, where a disciple needs to grow into their own selves and have and create and have their own voice. And one of the most effective ways that we found in doing that is treating music as a language. And the language is taught in particular. How I speak right now is a concoction of many people that I've heard and have picked up and then decided this is how I'm going to speak. With this whole concoction of the people that inspired me to speak the way I do. So the very same way with music. The reason why transcription is so important, not in the sense that we have to write it down, but in the sense that I actually listen and replicate all the masters that have been and have expressed themselves in a particular way, for me to be able to get that and that for me to come up to a conclusion that this is my own personal voice in this context. And now to my question, Dr. Ntshengedzeni, is it not the reason why instruments are divided into genders because of the messages they carry? As we know that African music carry certain messages, like for example, in Sisulu, we have something called Ubudod. When a person is not teacher, women are not present and they don't know what to say at it. And we know that this music carries so much story, so many stories and messages in that. Is that not the reason why the instruments are divided in that way?
Yes, that's very true. Certain instruments have specific meaning to particular genders. And even the songs themselves, they'll be speaking to that. So we cannot discard that. That is the reality. That is how those songs exist within the culture. But I think what I'm trying to say is we need to find ways of even challenging that, because sometimes if you don't challenge it, you realize that there wasn't even a strong reason enough for keeping that. So I'm saying as academics, we always have to be critical and also finding ways. Like I said, I played all these instruments. And if I were to play them in the village, sometimes I was going to be, attacked. Why are you playing this one? Why? You understand what I'm trying to say? So I'm saying we can go ahead, think forward, and find other ways of making sure that we're not just stuck because the tradition says this is what should be done. Thank you.
I just briefly want to return to the financial question. Dr. Ntshengedzeni in his book makes an interesting argument about one of the reasons that these instruments aren't practiced anymore, and it's because it's not seen as viable to make a living of it. So he argues, and if I'm misrepresenting, you must correct me, but he argues that the answer for that is professionalization. And in terms of professionalizing the playing of these indigenous instruments, education plays a very central role because that immediately lifts the status of the instruments and it will also lift the image of it within society and make it more attractive, I suppose, to play the instruments.
Thanks very much for these comments and questions. I think that one of the greatest compliments you can have is to have one of your readers telling an audience what your argument is. And I think that shows that the book has already got legs. Ms. Kembo, are you going to give a vote of thanks now? All right, let me hand over to you.
Thank you, Prof. Allow me to stand on my feet to deliver this vote of thanks. Ladies and gentlemen, the COD, Boitumelo Kembo by the Department of Art and Music, the leadership of the college, friends, postgraduate students, we thank you for availing yourselves for this conversation. We are critical, we are grateful for each and every sentence that each and every one of you in this seating has contributed to the paragraph that we had already started to write. We, the intellectual and creative pensmen and penswomen of this department, from different areas of specialization, different races, different cultures, and different ethnicities. The art historians, the visual artists, the musicologists, we are the generation that has committed to opening the door to and embracing transforming the curriculum through transdisciplinary relationships that will allow us to create and product new ways of seeing, being, understanding, and making. To the Transformation Committee that started in one DMC meeting with just 4 members and has now grown to a whole entire family of more than 8 colleagues. The people. We call ourselves the people. The people in their bold quest to go beyond the boundaries of obedient aesthetics, and even without a budget to book a venue or provide refreshments, we did it. And I am because you are. Thank you.
Thank you.
There is coffee and there's biscuits and there is water served outside. Thank you, Connie.